Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to listen about the last 4 or 5 months of our project. We really appreciate you coming to listen to us, and we are really excited to show you what we've been up to. So our project is called Movimento deloscampos, and in Portuguese that means movement of the fields or movement of the farms. And our project is called the Search for Economic Viability in Regenerative Farming. So both Deanna and I, CLTL knows, I've been pretty obsessed with regenerative agriculture over the past year, mostly because we're really inspired by its potential for big systemic change in the food system, not only in the food system, but pretty much in every sector, and most of the issues in the world, regenerative agriculture can play a big role. For example, in our lifetime, the global population is expected to reach 9 billion people by 2050. So that means that agriculture has to produce about 50% more food than we're already producing right now. And we're already producing a lot. And I don't know if you know, but scientists say that we only have about 60 years of farming left. So 60 years of food left, 99 billion people by 2050. That math doesn't really add up for me. And I know that I don't want to live in that world personally. So this is a video. This recently happened in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Massive sandstorms, mostly because of the way that we've been farming and treating the land. So I just wanted to play the video, but it's not playing. There we go. So that's some pretty apocalyptic stuff. And again, this is because of the way that we're treating our soil. Soil is pretty much the main focus of regenerative agriculture. So there are a lot of other issues that we're facing in the world, like poverty, indigenous sovereignty, actual health of our food system. Over 40% of Americans are living with chronic disease. That's a really expensive medical system. And I think that it has to do something to do with the quality of our food. So regenerative agriculture can really tackle a lot of these issues, not just land conservation. So in a human-focused conservation approach, regenerative farming is a form of conservation that addresses so many other problems in the world. But in order for regenerative farming to become the norm in our food system, it has to be economically sustainable. Generally, conservation doesn't have a good track record of taking economic sustainability into consideration, which means that we're always ending up having to rely on some sort of sponsor, which is usually a very wealthy person, very wealthy people who have built up their fortunes through upholding the current status quo. So it ends up becoming an endless cycle where conservation uses all this money to clean up messes, which isn't fair. Regenerative farming is different because it actually produces value in economic terms without exploitation. So that means that we can conserve and regenerate land while economically sustain ourselves and without exploitation. So regenerative farming produces a lot of food, not just food, but resources, textiles, all these kinds of things through honest and holistic methods. But it is really hard to fit it into the current commodity system where our resources are highly industrialized and the status quo is cheap and exploitative methods. So it ends up making it so that conventional large-scale agriculture is cheaper, but it's because we're exploiting either labor or land or both. We know about the environmental impacts of conventional ag, but the ag and food sector are primarily propped up by modern day slavery across the world. This means that criminal groups typically traffic in vulnerable people who are working 16 hours every day with no break or days off, and they have no conditions to leave. So in my mind, this is modern day slavery that we need to pay a lot of attention to. These big farms pretty much pay no taxes anywhere, And often we're subsidizing their messes with our taxpayer dollars in order for it to be economically viable. So our current food system is only cheap because it transfers all the externalities to other institutions like governments, like NGOs. They pollute, they degrade the land, and we're the ones who have to really pay the price outside of the supermarket. So the price of our food doesn't reflect the real cost of the production because of many different tax regimes and obstacles that they don't have in their way. So at the end of the day, like, we are all paying the consequences of this mindless exploitation. Regenerative farming has proven time and time again to be so much more viable in pretty much every way, but it faces so many obstacles, not just like high taxes, but low support across the board. And it can be pretty dangerous to be an advocate for regenerative farming because the conventional agriculture community is so powerful. So the big question these days is, how do we find economic viability for regenerative agriculture given all of the obstacles that it faces as the underdog? And these are big questions, and Deanna and I just took a small look into how to figure this out. So I'll hand it off to Deanna.
So the question is, where is Brazil right now? And we have some facts right here. So Brazil, first and foremost, is the most biodiverse country on Earth, which is amazing when you think about it. It is a huge country, but just the amount of biodiversity that exists there is astounding. Recently, Brazil has transitioned from a major food importer to a massive food exporter. Now, unfortunately, this has led to expansive deforestation. Because of that, Brazil is now the fourth largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and 76% of the country's gas emissions come from the changes in the land and the forest. A little bit of location background for our project. So the Atlantic forest biome, which is a part of the Rio Grande do Sul, is currently experiencing an 88% deforestation rate. MOVIMENTO deloscampos is found in the Serra Gaúcha region of the Rio Grande do Sul. Next slide.
Sorry, I was so engaged. I forgot.
So here is a couple of maps. On the right, you'll see Brazil is in the beige color, and MOVIMENTO deloscampos is in the very southern tip of Brazil. And on the left, you'll see the location of MOVIMENTO deloscampos is, and you can see this is a terrain map. So you can see there's some rocky outcliffs. It's pretty close to the water. And just to give you an idea of where we're located. Go ahead and next. So MOVIMENTO deloscampos deals with regenerative agriculture, but also agroforestry. And we have 3 points for that. In terms of availability, southern Brazil contains more than 15 million hectares of available land for conservation to sustainable agroforestry systems. The climate, there are 4 relatively well-defined seasons with rainfall dispersed year-round. The winter sees a cold southwesterly wind and heavy rainfall. In terms of need, research into agroforestry systems in Brazil is new. Now is the perfect time to begin implementing sustainable systems. In terms of regenerative agriculture, we just wanted to give a basic update. There are 5 basic principles of regenerative ag. The first is to minimize soil disturbance, then to maximize crop diversity. The goal is to always keep the soil covered. We want to maintain a living root system year-round with that crop cover, and to have true regenerative ag, you have to integrate livestock into the operation. I'm not going to get into these outcomes because right here, these are some major outcomes from regenerative agriculture. Not only does it help build healthy organic soil, but soil is the building block of all agriculture. Your soil is going to determine the nutrient density and the value of the foods that you produce. And it's going to be very telling of the microbiome that exists within that soil structure. Not only does it improve the soil, it increases farm productivity. It improves the quality of life for farmers based on their methods. It also protects local environments, improves biodiversity, reduces pollution. And then we see that it really benefits consumers with an improved quality of food and diverse diets. When you're not growing monocultures, you have the opportunity to provide a really extensive diet. And like big term, regenerative agriculture has the potential to reverse climate change. It improves carbon sequestration if done correctly. It has flood and drought reduction, and it reduces fuel usage on farms.
Okay, so I'm going to jump into my portion of the master's project. This project is called MOVIMENTO deloscampos because of the farm that we've been working with. I came across this farm a couple of years ago in my travels, and I met Mateus, the owner of this farm, and it's a regenerative sheep farm. So he mostly is just producing lamb right now through a method called voisin rational grazing. So basically these sheep move paddocks up to 3 times a day. And so they're always constantly moving. You're constantly mimicking the natural like herd pattern as it would be in the wild. So it's one of the most regenerative methods to produce livestock. It's beautiful there. There's so much biodiversity. And it's the best meat I've ever had. Oh my God, it's so good. And here's the branding on the left. His wife is a graphic designer, and they are very business savvy, but also have this real connection with nature cycles. So all of that has led them to be incredibly economically sustainable. They've created an amazing business model. And it's really, really, really hard to find an economically viable regenerative farm for many reasons. So what we saw this opportunity and we were like, okay, we need to take this business model and scale it up, because right now it's around 400 sheep, but this business model could be applied to something much, much bigger and potentially provide meat for, maybe the entire southern half of Brazil. So my idea for this master's project was to find international investment and use that to create a large pilot project of large-scale regenerative agriculture in Brazil using Movimento deloscampos' current model. This is a really simple graphic of investment would go through Mateus as the lead and the Movimento deloscampos current infrastructure. And here is me and my husband Attila and his company that he founded of agroforestry called Muvuca. So basically we would be his team, we find the investment, and then we become employees and help scale up this project. So this was my main project when I got here, is to work on this societal level change. So this is a big project, big money, big change, all this kind of stuff. And my goal was to develop the team and this business plan, connect with international investors, and develop a media strategy. And I have been working on all of that pretty hard, but I also realized that, this is a big project. This is a long-term project, and there are a lot of different moving parts and other people involved. And so it's not something that I can necessarily be working on every single day, because there are other people that I'm relying on, and primarily Mateus, who is a full-time running a farm 5 hours away. So I needed to find a lot of other stuff to do so I could be actively working every day. And I also was interested in working more at the community level, because sometimes I feel like we work so hard at creating society level change and we don't look at our own community and work at that level too. So I started to work with Attila's company called Muvuca, and this is a more local agroforestry farm. And I wanted to help them create an economically viable CSA program. So if you don't know what a CSA, it's like weekly fruit and vegetable deliveries. It's a marketing model where consumers actually buy shares of a farm's harvest in advance. That's the typical model, but we are just doing weekly purchases. And then I also wanted to help them develop a stronger community presence. And then through that community level work, I came into contact with this really cool, it's like Afrocentric, Afro-philosophical community center in a favela here in Florianopolis. And because they wanted to have Muvuca develop a community garden for them so they could learn how to cultivate their own food and not be so reliant on the local expensive food markets. So it became also my goal to help them find financing and then use some of that to develop and finance the community garden project. So I'll start with the Movimento deloscampos project. So again, I wanted to develop a team, business plan, connect with investors, and develop a media strategy. So this is the team that I put together. We have Mateus, Marvin, Attila, and Pablo, and these are all the regenerative farming tech experts. Altogether, it's around 30 years experience in farming. On the right, we have more agroforestry, so anything that can be grown in a forest, they're experts at. And then on the left, we have the livestock experts. Something really important is that Mateos has 15 years experience as a business management consultant, and that's one of the main reasons why his farm is economically viable and why this makes such a good and unique team. Then we have me on the communications team, and we have Carol, who is Mateos's wife, and she's an expert in design and brand management, which I can't say enough how important that is to be able to like run a farm. And Gustavo, who's a professional YouTuber, which is also surprisingly important to running a farm. And he'll be doing pretty much anything that has to do with video and selling online courses. And then finally, we have Caro Machias, who are currently finishing up their master's in sustainable investment, but they also had a really successful company here that had to do with conscious consumerism and stuff. And Machias, he actually just got a job at a regenerative investment firm, which is very, very convenient and awesome for this project. So they help us when it comes to anything that has to do with the business and investment portion. And then finally, my partner, Deanna, which you all know very well, and she will talk about her project later, obviously. So this is the very simple version of the business idea that we put together. So here up top, I'll talk about the commercial part first. So the idea is that we put together we get initial investment for a pilot project to prove concept, to show that this business model really works and that we can generate a good profit while regenerating the land and producing livestock in a responsible way. So once we prove concept with that, then we move on and we write up contracts with other farmers throughout the region who will then use regenerative methods and sell and consult through the Movimiento deloscampos brand. And revenue from that will finance, like sustain their families, but also finance the company's expansion. So one important thing to note here is that farmers are genuinely expected to be Renaissance people and just be able to do everything on top of running a farm. So you're also expected to be a business manager and a social media expert and a videographer somehow and a logistics chain expert. And this is like completely unreasonable, especially if these are family farms. I mean, nobody has time for that. Every family can't have their own brand. So we have to have umbrella companies and umbrella brands that then sell all these regenerative products. And we do the logistics, like we do the branding, we do the social media, we do all that stuff. And farmers can do what they love, which is to live on the farm and like farm, just be a farmer. The next portion is the foundation. We really wanted to develop a nonprofit aspect of this company because ultimately, like, we're doing this because we want to help the world. Like, we're not really trying to make a ton of money. Obviously sustaining ourselves will be good, but we wanted a nonprofit portion where we can receive grants and donations to do open source research and development so that we can disseminate best practices and also consult with and train farmers for free in their transition to better farming methods. And then eventually we're going to have to establish a fund that connects investors, probably impact investors, with farmers here that need resources in order to transition to regenerative ag. Generally, the investment world is a place where farmers are completely lost and taken advantage of. So I think it's really important for us to have this component where we kind of act as the middlemen for investors and farmers. So we had an idea that we haven't heard anyone else talk about, and we think it's pretty good. And this is the plan of what we'll be doing. So this is a little simple graphic I made. So this is when it comes to the farmers that we'll be contracting with, who will then sell through the Movimiento deloscampos brand. So we have this person, this man up here on the left, and this is generally going to be someone who either already has a farm and is renting their land, or is generally undervalued and underpaid labor on a bigger farm. And these are people who would like to sustain their families and who would like to work like good jobs. So we will find these people and make sure that they align with our values as well. And we sign a 30-year contract with them on a piece of probably pretty degraded land. This could be land that has been mismanaged with livestock for many years, or maybe like old soy farms or something like that, very low biodiversity levels. So they would sign this 30-year contract. And at that point, when they sign the contract, they move to the land and we plant a ton of really valuable lumber in like through regenerative methods, right? And so then over this time, we're helping them, you know, pretty much in many ways. We're providing them resources, help, and they sell everything that they're producing through the MOVIMENTO deloscampos brand. So we're doing all that work for them. And then over 30 years, the land is regenerated. There's probably had a family, probably have really connected with the land over that time and fell in love with it. That's the goal. And we cut down the lumber, and at that point, lumber is really valuable. They can sell the lumber and then they buy that land back from the initial investors. So they are now landowners, business owners, living on a beautiful piece of land with a, you know, respectable career. And that's our idea for like this like social aspect piece of regenerative agriculture. So like I said before, the initial idea was that the investment would go through Mateos and MOVIMENTO deloscampos, and me and Atila and Muvuka would kind of function as the team. But a month ago, Mateos came to us and told us that him and his wife are pregnant and having a baby in 2 months. So, and he felt like he was really holding us back because, you know, a cyclone hit the barn and he's having a baby and all this stuff is happening. So realistically, like he can't lead this entire project and he's been holding us back. So now this is potentially what the situation could look like. He's like, Atila and Carlyle, you guys take the lead. I need you guys to essentially like found this company kind of. And MOVIMENTO deloscampos will be a guaranteed partner consultant and will buy all the meat. Like, and so it would still be selling through the brand, but him and I are taking the reins. So we have a lot of like questions to ask ourselves and things to think about, because like we don't have the same experience that he does. He has 15 years in business management, and so we're doing a lot of research right now. We're reading a lot about founding startups. We're wondering if we're still going to do the animal agriculture piece. We like through our research, we know at least what we don't know, and that's a lot when it comes to the investment world. Often founders of startups, the main problem is they tend to be way overconfident about the potential success of their project, and they way undershoot the resources that they're going to need. So we really don't want to do that. And we're thinking that this is probably going to end up being a longer term, maybe like 1 to 2 years, figuring out what are the perfect conditions for us to receive a $2 to $3 million investment without screwing ourselves over. So we're asking ourselves a lot of questions right now and doing a lot of research. So that's kind of where that part of the project stands at this point. And then these were the deliverables for my project. There's very little consumer education on regenerative agriculture. People tend to equate eco-friendly with organic or with plant-based or vegan, or basically all these words that don't have anything to do with being eco-friendly. So we wanted to have the MOVIMENTO deloscampos Instagram page serve as a consumer education Instagram. So right now here is just pictures of the land and pictures of the meat. We wanted it to look very different and really educate people about what they're eating, and kind of like just like raise that consciousness level. So these are my 3 deliverables. The first was just to come up with a classic brand story that you keep telling over and over to people so they really understand what you're all about. So this is in Portuguese, but there's a 2-page, very simplified brand story. And then we have like about a 5 to 6 page longer form story about the company. And this is really important to creating a social media strategy, because you have to understand what your company is all about and everything that you could potentially talk about. This is my second deliverable, which is just a oh shoot. Can you see? Hopefully you can still see the presentation. I'm not able to scroll through it, but this is a classic social media strategy, who your audience is, what your Instagram goals are, how you're going to take on controversial topics, what's your tone, all this kind of stuff. And then my final deliverable was to come up with the first month of Instagram posts. And you can't see it, but I did it, I swear. Anyways, I basically just came up with a lot of posts and videos and reels. You actually have to have videos and reels on your Instagram. Otherwise, Instagram won't promote your, it won't promote your account to other people. So you have to have reels. So we just talked about, is meat healthy? What is regenerative agriculture? What is rotational grazing? What is the carbon capturing of, livestock? Anyways, all this kind of stuff. It was really fun to do, and I'm going to continue running the Instagram from now on. So I'm going to move on to the community level work with Muvuka Agroflorestal. And Muvuka is a word that is an indigenous word here, and it's basically when you take just a bunch of seeds and you just throw them all over the soil, and it just grows a bunch of diverse plants, and you kind of just see what you get. And that's a very classic way to plant here, with indigenous people, indigenous farmers. There's just tons of diversity, and you eat what comes out of it. And it's it was also kind of talking about how we're really supportive of diversity of people too. So we really love that name. And my goal was to help them develop an economically viable CSA program, and then that strong local presence, which is really important for farms too. So when I got here, the CSA program was not doing well. And I thought that I would focus on helping it become more economically viable, and then I could take notes about how to help other farms do that in the future. So there were a few problems with the CSA program when I got here. The first is that the team is too large. So Muvuka is a collective, which is a really great idea, but it is hard to execute. With this project, there was too many people and not enough work. So probably if 2 people had been working on it, they would have been able to get paid, but there were 5 people working on it. And so basically just the team was too big, and there were differing visions among the people in the collective, which happens in a collective is everyone's the boss, right? So that makes decisions really hard to make decisions when everyone's the boss. Then they didn't have enough experience to make sufficient calculations for what the costs were going to be, how much people were going to pay. CSA programs are really, really new in Brazil. People don't have enough money to pay upfront for the first 3 months. So people just pay every week. And credit card costs are really high. So there's so many things that are not applicable as they're done in the US.
Hey, Carlyle, I think the slideshow's frozen.
What are you on now?
We're still on your deliverables.
Oh, that's not where I'm at. Okay, 1 second.
Also, just to be conscious of time, we are running a bit short.
Okay, I'm almost done.
We're we don't have a presentation immediately after this one. There's a gap, so we're okay on time as far as not running into another one. But who do I say that not knowing, for people on the call what their schedules are. So, but just know that if you need to go over that, I'm here. Yeah, fine. Just don't want to go away and sort of feel anxious.
Cool. Can we see?
Yeah.
Okay, this was I had these slides. They were pretty, and now they're gone. Okay, so where was I? So they just assumed that as they got more and more clients that the program would be economically viable over time, which was not the case because there were a lot of costs that they hadn't calculated properly. And then they were very risk averse when it came to investment. So they received a good investment at the beginning, but they were just really worried about paying it back as soon as possible. So for example, if you have 2 years to pay your investment back, you're like, oh, well, wouldn't it be better if we just paid it off within 3 months and we don't have to worry? But then you end up not actually making the most out of the investment. So they got an investment, but they were more worried about paying it back than using it. So what we did was we broke down teams, which was pretty intuitive to me. And so now there's only 2 people working on the CSA program, and anyone who has a different vision basically can start their own project and use the Movuka brand, and it works a little bit better for the collective model. Now they have the experience, so they like basically like slow down the CSA program a lot so that they could really focus on calculating all the costs. And now we're starting it back up again, already starting economically viable so that it's like worth it for them to do the CSA program. Then we created a partnership with a local composting company called Angatu. And the idea is the guy, Angatu, he picks up the compost from the people. And then he takes the compost to Movuka, where Movuka produces the food with the compost and then delivers the CSA food back to the person who gave the compost. So it's like closing the food cycle and waste cycle on the island, which is a completely new thing. It's a totally differentiated product that doesn't exist here. And he has about 400 clients, and he did a survey, and about 80% of the clients are interested in getting the basket. So we have an evidence-based complementary product. Local partnerships are really important for farms. And when you have a farm in a more urban area, it seems like farms end up being event spaces too, because it's such a good way to make money. It would be cool if you could make money producing food, but you have to do more than that. So here we've developed a partnership with the local chef, and he's doing events with Patagonia on the farm now, which is really exciting and is going to be really helpful for us. Partnerships with the local composting company and my capoeira group. So we'll be doing capoeira events on the farm, which I'm really excited about. That's a little video of us there playing. And then with this community center that I'll talk about for just a couple of minutes coming up next. So I fell in love with this local community center. They're really amazing. And it's called Escola Livre. It's like a free school. So it's in a favela, which is just a very low income, unofficial housing, I guess. Like all the electricity and water, all of that's kind of like, I don't know how to say it, just like it's not on the map, right? Just because it's so low income, and it's primarily like Afro-Brazilians. So during the Atlantic Strait slave trade era, Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any other country in the entire world. So an estimated 5 million enslaved people from Africa were imported to Brazil. So the African culture here is really, really strong, but it's obviously also like greatly suppressed and oppressed. And this community center is all about Afro-Brazilians like figuring out what their culture was like when they got here and before they were oppressed, and how do they become, essentially, like how do they figure out who they were and who they were meant to be. So it's like this really big focus on African philosophy and music and culture, and it's like tons of free SAT classes and professionalization courses. So it's all supported by this woman, Eli, who's like the Wonder Woman of the operation. And she pays for everything, like the whole school, through her acarajé production, which is like, it's like an Afro-Brazilian falafel with shrimp and spices, and it's really delicious. And I just really like them and wanted to help them. So my goal quickly became to help them acquire funding through the grant education that I got at CLTL, and then use some of that to develop a community garden. So it was, anyways, this isn't working too well, but I already wrote 2 grants to try to get them 20,000 reais for the programs, and the grants closed today, and I got them in last week. So hopefully they get the money and it'll be able to support their projects going on, and we can get Movuka in there and like start teaching how to grow food there. So that's my portion of the project, and I'll let Deanna go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, so my portion of this project was to do some stateside research, particularly into economic sustainability on farms, regenerative operations in the United States. So this summer I worked with 4 regenerative operations, and our goal was to discern how these farms were operating financially and use that information to help MDLC secure investors and funding in the coming years. Now, initially, our hope was that funding for United States farms would be similar to funding for Brazil farms. And unfortunately, that is not what we found. But that's okay, because research is research. And it was important to know that things are done completely differently here in the United States. And we took that and we ran with it. And I got some really valuable experience working with some partners. And I'll just get right into it. So these are the questions that I asked when I was going to farmers. We sat down and decided a couple of questions in economic sustainability and then cultural relevance. So in terms of economic, we wanted to know first, is your farm economically sustainable, whatever that meant to the farmers and to the farm itself? And then we wanted to know if they had any specifics on their business model. We asked what their initial investment was, and what we found, I'm just going to say right now, is that people were not super willing to share their numbers, which is fine. It was a learning experience. And when I asked things like, what was your initial investment? They'd say, oh, a tractor or this building, which is like definitely an investment, but 100% not what we were looking for. So we were really trying to get hard data, and we got a lot of soft answers, which is fine. It told us what is of value to these farmers. And we wanted to know how they financed the initial investment. And then what became really important is understanding if the farmers had any value-added products and what those were. And then also if they had community partnerships. And then a question on expansion, which didn't get the reaction that we were looking for. In terms of cultural relevance, we wanted to know what regenerative farming meant to them, and then specifically how the natural environment influenced their farming practices, because the farms that I went to were in pretty different environments. So these are the 4 farms that I visited: Reunity Resources in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Spirit Farm in Vanderwagen, New Mexico, Brightwood Farm in Durango, Colorado, and then Halem River Ranch in Nehalem, Oregon. So we'll talk about Reunity Resources. So this is a picture of Reunity Resources. It's a small regenerative operation in Santa Fe, and their main goal is to impact food equity and access in an area of food deserts. Santa Fe may be developed, but it is still in an area that doesn't have a lot of access to fresh and clean food. And their grocery stores are pretty sparse, especially when you get outside the city center. So at the farm, they sell fresh produce. And as Carlyle mentioned, farms that are more towards urban centers end up being event centers. So they have a space for community members to gather and connect with one another. And that's extremely important for this farm. They also operate a composting facility for the city of Santa Fe. So they go around their area and they provide composting buckets to houses, and they will pick it up every week, run the compost, and then distribute it out to local landscaping companies. There are 3 planting fields on this farm and 1 year-round greenhouse. So in terms of funding, this was one of the places I didn't get to spend too much time. They were very busy with a couple of events that they were planning, so I only got to spend 1 full day there. But what I did understand is that the property itself was bought from a previous farmer who did not use pesticides. So this was extremely lucky for the farm, because they were already starting off on a really good foot to transition into regenerative farming. They didn't have to do as much healing of the soil. The farm itself was bought through a home mortgage loan, and their initial investment was a tractor and a trailer. They relied heavily on crowdfunding to get their operations, their costs of setup after they got their home loan. And so this is something that we're going to see consistently, is that most farms in the United States are financed through a home loan program, and they live on site, so that everything is tied up into a mortgage, which is not necessarily how it's done in Brazil. They self-report as economically sustainable, but with the caveat that if anything substantial or like catastrophic were to happen on the farm, like one year a windstorm blew over their greenhouse and they did not feel or economically sustainable that year because they had to dip into all of their reserves to repair the necessary, something necessary to the functioning of the farm. In terms of value-added products, they utilize a CSA model to increase profitability along with the composting operation that is sold to local municipalities. So that composting operation provides a lot of extra income on top of their CSA model for fruits and vegetable sales. Additionally, they have a community space where they hold events that bring in income, and they have a food cart that serves local farm fresh food and gets local chefs the chance to cook for community so that people have more awareness of the restaurants that are available or to help people get started in their dream of owning a restaurant. So these are a couple of pictures. On the left was when I was there and the planting season had just started. And then I got this picture on the right from their social media. That's after. You can see that's the greenhouse. And it's just a different angle. But their farm has 100% crop cover in the growing fields, and they really utilize the tenets of regenerative agriculture. Okay, so the farm that I spent the most time at was Spirit Farm down in Vanderwagen, New Mexico, and we'll talk about that for a minute. So that's a picture of Spirit Farm. It's a very small operation. It's a small Navajo-run regenerative operation in Vanderwagen, New Mexico. There is no running water on site. I mean, literally no running water on site. All of their water has to be driven in from Gallup, New Mexico and purified. And I got to help them a few times go in and get this water that smelled really heavily of chlorine. And we had to put their own mix of organic chemicals into it and let it sit for 48 hours before it could be used onto the field. And everything is stored in gigantic drums. They have to go get water every 2 days. And it is a huge investment because they're on reservation land and they don't have access to things that farmers would have not on reservation land. So the family or the land has been passed down through family lines, but because it's reservation land, the federal government technically owns it, which is something that they run into a lot of issues with. In terms of their focus, they focus more on community uplift and cultural revitalization, as well as community education. So their goal is to help connect Indigenous people to their ancient practices of regenerative farming. When I asked any questions about economic sustainability, they really don't care. They were like, that is not my goal. I don't operate from an economic funding standpoint. My goal is to heal my community. And I do that through giving back to my community. I don't care if they can't pay me. I will give them access to fruits and vegetables, community lessons. They provide chickens to people because they see chickens as this gateway where if you have a chicken that produces eggs, you're like, oh, I can start to provide for myself. And that's a really amazing thing. And so in terms of funding, the farm is owned by the Skeet family and has been for generations. But because it's on reservation land, certain changes cannot be made according to federal law. They are not allowed to expand the farm because they technically don't own it in the eyes of the government. They have been reliant upon grants and sales from their harvest, though economic sustainability is not their focus, and they care more about community enhancement and teaching farming methods to occupants of the reservation. I'll get a little bit more into Indigenous land rights in another slide, but this was seriously impactful to me when I realized that they can't even apply for a loan to get to expand their farm. And I was just like, so anybody who's Indigenous and lives on reservation land and wants to expand their farm, they literally are not able to, unless they get crowdfunding. In terms of value-added products, they have a fry bread stand and they partner with a lot of community organizations. That we would drive around to these small little farms and everybody would be like, hey, James, they're very prominent in their community. They offer a lot of workshops and they sell products from their animals, fruits and vegetables, and they have their own brand of fry bread mixes. So they have an actual fry bread stand. That's how they tell people where they are. is you have this little fry bread stand in the middle of nowhere, and they have community members come in and sell their products out of the fry bread stand. So it's one more way for involvement in the community. Joyce, the wife of James, also creates soaps and lotions that she sells at community events. And they also sell compost that they create from their animal products. So here's a couple of pictures. They have pigs, they have one cow, they have a lot of goats, and I actually got to see a baby pig be born when I was there. It was quite the experience, and it was the cutest thing I think I've ever seen in my life. And then they took me out on their little ATVs, and we went out and saw the canyon. So that's a picture of the canyon that they live by. Technically is their land, but they're not allowed to expand into it. And I also wanted to point out that I think that Spirit Farm would be an incredible opportunity for partnership with CLTL. They have a building that they can house somebody in, and this would be like a potential for a full-on project. They need a lot of help. I've been still helping them. They're trying to Airbnb out a couple of their outbuildings that were all built by grants, by the way. And I just think that this farm would really give CLTL the opportunity to get its hands in Indigenous conservation. All right, so the next farm that I visited was a couple hours north up in Durango, Colorado, called Brightwood Farm. And this is a picture of it. It is in the Animas Valley. It's a small regenerative operation in Durango, Colorado. They have 5 acres of property with a few cows, 1 growing field, and a greenhouse. Now, they believe solely in growing organically and regeneratively, and I do want to point out that it is not necessary to grow organic. Often those tenets are a little bit different than just pure regenerative farming, but they're newer to the scene, and they were really focused on organic growing methods as well as healing their soil. So that's how they are considered regenerative. They're able to produce vegetables almost year round and are passionate advocates for growing and eating nutrient-dense food. So they spoke so much about like the nutrient density of the food. And like they get their vegetables tested, and they're really high nutrient dense crops. Their crop quality is excellent because of the compost they produce and amend their soil with. And they really believe in access to healthy food for everybody. So the farm was bought in 2018, and it's a relatively new operation. They self-report as economically sustainable because they have a partnership with a local regenerative farm in Durango called James Ranch. And James Ranch has a market where they sell exclusively regenerative agriculture products. So they provide a lot of the vegetables for James Ranch, and that partnership sustains them enough that they don't really need to do much else, which is amazing. Like it really goes to show how powerful community partnerships can be. So let's see, it's financed through a home mortgage, and they are able to employ a few staff each year during planting and harvest season. Brightwood Farm does not have any other sources of income outside of vegetable sales because of their sustaining partnership with James Ranch. And here's a couple of pictures. I got to sit on their tractor, and then they have a couple of cows. These were a couple of the ones that I met. And then finally, Nehalem River Ranch in Nehalem, Oregon. So this is a picture of their field. Nehalem River Ranch is a 100-acre regenerative animal farm located on the Oregon coast of Nehalem, Oregon. They believe in the highest standard of animal welfare and land stewardship practices, as well as equitable access to local food in restaurants and stores. They have many community partners, and they frequently host events to support local farmers and local communities. They have cows and pigs that roam freely and live exceptional lives. The animals are necessary for their regenerative process, and their land is very healthy because of their practices. They don't grow any fruits or vegetables. This is purely an animal operation. The farm operates with beef and pork sales year-round. The property was purchased through a home mortgage and is economically sustainable. Out of all of the people that I talked to, Jared was the one who had all the facts and figures for me. He was completely transparent about how much he paid and the investment that he had. They also retail their meat across the coastal communities and all the way into Portland, which is over the mountains about an hour and a half east of the farm. And their partnerships with local restaurants also provide a consistent customer base. Nehalem River Ranch gets a majority of its income from meat sales, just the nature of the beast. Meat often gets more money than fruits and vegetable sales. They sell beef jerky products and products from local farms, but that's like such a small part of their operation. They are economically sustainable because of their meat sales. And here's a couple of cows, and then Jared with a local field trip. He brings in kids and teaches them about the processes that they're doing there. And I just want to point out that the relationship formed with Nehalem River Ranch has given MDLC a unique partnership opportunity with Jared Gardner. There he is laying with one of his cows. You can tell he really loves them. He has offered to work with MDLC to help find potential investors, and he is well connected in the conservation world and has worked with several startup ventures. He also wants to visit MDLC and create opportunities for partnership. Like, he has become so immensely helpful to all of us. Like, after I met with him, I called Carlyle and I was like, you have to meet with this guy. He's incredible. And so they've been meeting and having conversations, and he genuinely wants to help find investors for us. Okay, so a little bit about my takeaways and what I discovered at the farms. A majority of the farms in the United States are funded through home loan programs. These home loan programs have favorable interest rates compared to farming-specific loans. And another thing is that Indigenous communities do not have the same land rights because of federal law. This prevents Indigenous farmers on reservation lands from securing loans to improve or expand their farms. Even if the land is occupied by a family, the federal government has limitations on what can be done for it. In terms of social justice, all farms visited were passionate about some topic related to the access or quality of food provided to their communities. They were all advocates for regenerative practices and breaking systemic barriers that prevented the public from accessing healthy food. So what I noticed is this passion often drives the creation of a farming operation and is an excellent motivation for the success of the farm. Another takeaway is community involvement. Value-added products have the ability to immensely improve revenue streams, yet we can see with these 4 farms that even if a farm does not have ample value-added products, successful community partnerships often seem to be more important in determining economic sustainability. And a final point, again, of Indigenous land rights, I feel like I can't hammer this in enough. Indigenous farmers on reservations do not have the same access to land ownership. Federal law restricts reservation land and aids in the cultural decimation of Indigenous culture and the loss of ancient farming knowledge. This also prevents Indigenous farmers on reservation lands from securing loans to improve or expand their farms. Even if the land is occupied by a family, the federal government can limit what's done on it. So my suggestions after this research for MDLC, again, the goal was to help them understand the process of farm ownership and economic sustainability in the United States. The information we got was not what we were expecting, and that's totally okay. My 3 recommendations are to invest in community partnerships like they currently are. So many US regenerative farms are not financed the way farms might be in Brazil. There are more farms that use home loans to purchase their land than traditional credit financing seen in Brazil. It's important to build relationships with partners who are able to potentially provide access to additional funding methods. Also, to focus on finding investors for current projects. Expansion in Brazil will help fund expansion into the United States if that were to ever be something that happened, but it will also help just fund their current projects. The most economical route would be to get grants and funders to assist with down payments and a home loan for properties. And then to continue securing value-added products. Value-added products have the ability to increase income significantly. Creating a market as a hub for local farmers to sell their goods also increases community involvement and relationship building.
Thank you so much, Deanna. I'm going to go quickly into my conclusions and reflections too. So yeah, after the 4 farms that Deanna went into, you can see that pretty much if you're in regenerative farming, it's because you're incredibly passionate about it, and money probably is always going to be your second focus. So yes, a lot of farms are not economically viable, and a lot of farms are just literally trying to feed their families and feed their local communities. And if you're not economically viable, then that's just, you just accept that that's something that's not going to happen. But I don't see why that has to be the case, because regenerative farms are so productive. They just have so many obstacles standing in their way, and we need to create like big level infrastructure that supports these farms. Like, not every farm leader can be a Jared. Jared has like many years experience in venture capital and business management, and that's why his farm is economically viable. So we spoke to Jared. He is freaking amazing, and he's the kind of people that, you know, these are going to be leaders in creating these umbrella companies where other farmers can like sell their products through. So another one of my reflections is that my timeline of how long this project was going to take is totally has been extended greatly. So again, the MOVIMENTO deloscampos project and finding these investments, I mean, we did connect, we have investors who are willing to invest, but we're not ready for that. I don't think so $3 million is a lot of money, and I just finished my master's program. Like, I'm not ready to handle that kind of money. So even though we have investors who are willing to invest, like I need to understand my own lack of experience, and that it's probably going to take 1 to 2 years to do some real research into impact investing, to create a foolproof business plan with the help of Jared, and just like understand what the perfect conditions are for receiving this kind of investment, and make sure that those conditions are ready so that we don't head into something that we're not prepared for. So in the meantime, we'll be working on Movuca, like really building up these other projects that we're working on. The next one of my reflections is the stark difference between the understanding of ecology from a regenerative perspective as opposed to an academic conservation perspective. Often visions of like how to regenerate an ecosystem, or how to care for an ecosystem, they don't align. And I think that's something that conservation like really needs to pay attention to. For example, invasive species. So again, regenerative, we have like pretty much primarily practical experience, and on the conservation side, we have like a lot of understanding based on academic research. So in conservation, we spend about $162 billion on invasive species management, but in regenerative agriculture, invasive species aren't a problem. And I think that's really interesting. They talk about how invasive species are always showing you something that you're doing wrong in your land management. So if you have invasive species, it's like, if you're planting what you want, nature is going to show you what you can actually grow there. And that they consider invasive species to be biological indicators that are showing you that it's not the time to grow what you're trying to grow, and that your ecosystem is recovering, not that you should be planting more demanding plants. And typically native plants are very demanding species. So if you keep pulling invasive, well, as they say, if you keep pulling invasive species out with their root system intact, you're actually halting nature's process of regeneration. So like, for example, cutting and leaving the plants there to like build up the soil would be much better than pulling the entire root systems out. So for the most part in regenerative agriculture, invasive plants and weeds are really important because they colonize areas that are too degraded for native plants to grow. Those invasives or weeds improve the conditions of the ecosystem over time by building the soil so that it can eventually host more demanding plants like native species. So I think like this is like a shocking like difference in perspective, right? And like these two sectors have to be talking to each other, because we have this like wealth of not only just like current practical experiences, but like farming experience that goes back a really long time. And then we have like a more occidental view of ecology in conservation academic research. And I definitely think that's changing. But I think that these are two paradigms that have a lot to absorb from each other. And I would love to talk to CLTL about this kind of stuff like over time. Another one of my reflections is that I have a lot of experience that I still need. For the longest time, as most people in conservation have shunned, literally say the word investment and I would run the other way. I'd be like, wow, that's boring. But wow, I need to learn that now. So I've been like taking courses on impact investing and business management, all the stuff that I never thought I would ever do, and realize that I need to live in the world as it is today in order to change society in the way that I want it to. So shocker, but it's cool. I'm happy. I'm learning. Another one of my reflections is that moving to a new, I've lived in different countries before. I've even lived in Brazil before, but I was much younger, and there's a difference between communicating at a party and trying to work in your job of strategic communications in a different language, in a different culture. It's really hard, and it's going to take me a lot longer than I thought to be able to do my job properly here. I rely a lot on Atula to help me actually create a nuanced language about regenerative agriculture, because in strategic comms you're trying to alter someone's perception of agriculture in general, and you do that through very specific usage of words and context and culture, and I don't have that in Portuguese. So that was a wake-up call to me. I have a lot to learn. And then finally, society versus community level work. I'm a very big picture thinker, so I'm always like, I'm going to change this huge problem in the world, or I'm like, I'm going to work every day and just change the big picture. And the amount of volunteering or local community work that I've done is not a lot, because I'm always focused on these big problems. And I think this is the first time where I've turned around and be like, okay, well, while I'm working on these societal changes, I think I should really work on my community too. And I actually became much, much happier when I started to actually help out the local community, kind of expecting nothing in return. And I actually think it was a good work in ego, because I think it definitely builds your ego to be like, I'm going to solve this huge problem that no one else can solve, as opposed to oh, I'm going to actually work in service of the people around me. So that was actually a pretty big personal reflection of mine. So thank you all for sitting through our presentation. We really appreciate it. And we wanted to thank our advisors, Brett and Dawson. And it's really great to see you, Professor Gruby, here. You're one of my favorite professors. And I'm glad that you got to see this. And our partners, MOVIMENTO deloscampos, Mubuka, and Ubuntu. And I know that Deanna wanted to thank all the farms that she worked with.